Alright, so let's talk semantic mapping. This is a strategy that's usually best used to make intro paragraphs on keywords and concepts. So if you think about argumentative essays where you're dealing with, one particular subject or concept, those of you who did the AP ones for the second essay, you saw disobedience, you saw exploring the unknown. So in this case here, we're really only dealing with a few words, but once you actually delineate and figure out what those words mean on a more complex or sophisticated level, you have a way better chance of establishing something with more ground and substance here. So semantic mapping, we've done this before, but otherwise it's kind of a quick review in terms of why you should do it and also how to apply it to any essay that has a singular topic to focus on here. So consider this prompt. This is the prompt we'll be using for this example here today. 2015 argumentative essay. It goes something like this. An anthropologist studying first-year students at a university in the United States writes that friendly phrases like "How are you?", "Nice to meet you," and "Let's get in touch" communicate politeness rather than literal intent. What, if anything, is the value or function of such polite speech? In a well-written essay, develop your position on the value or function of polite speech in a culture or community with which you are familiar. Use appropriate evidence from your reading experience or observations to support your argument. So going back one paragraph here, we're dealing with this idea that "how are you?", "nice to meet you," "let's get in touch," they don't mean what they're meaning. So if I go up to you and I say, "Hey, nice to meet you," I don't really mean that it's nice to meet you. It's simply that I'm making perhaps a conclusion to our conversation, that I'm saying, "Hey, this is a good talk," but otherwise, you as a person, I don't really know you in general yet, especially when we say this in a glancing thing, right? Like a first handshake, "Hey, nice to meet you." How do you know? We haven't even met yet. So really, it's politeness rather than literal intent. So going back to the actual question of the prompt here, second paragraph, we have to develop a position on the value or function of polite speech in a culture or community with which you are familiar. So it's either or, right? It's either the value, it's either the function, but otherwise what we gotta deal with is that overlooming word of polite. What does it mean to be polite, and how can I work with this particular concept in this time span here? So we've seen this before, but otherwise we're just going to go over semantic mapping real quick. We're looking at the denotation of the word, the actual dictionary definition, etymology of the word, the history of this word in its context, connotations of the word, meaning whatever synonyms come to mind, or what do I attach to this word symbolically, where I've seen the word in usage, so it could be common speak, it could be like this word polite in a phrase or whatever, image of the word, so a literal image in my head whenever I think of the word polite, what forms in my mind, and also works that contain the subject of politeness, which is more for like body paragraph, for evidence building, kind of like a BS chart, but really this helps us with our intro paragraph as well if we can get a very concrete item to put in there for the sake of discussion. So let's talk about the first step, right? We're thinking about denotation. What does it literally mean to be polite based on dictionary definition? So it's an adjective that is a characteristic of something or someone having or showing behavior that is respectful and considerate of other people. So in this case, it is a showing, right, or having a behavior. So I'm acting out respect and consideration, and the key part is this: of other people. So it's not about me as a person, but it's more about the society around me, and I have to cope with that society or deal with that society or consider that society around me here. Example sentence given. They thought she was wrong, but were too polite to say so. So it wasn't really about me feeling bad or about, just this ethics and morals of what to say and not to say. It was more about be considerate of the other person and just try not to offend them or whatever. So it's more about the society that we are in relations to rather than ourselves in this case here. Number two, etymology. So we think about how this word has evolved and we think about the background, because this usually gives us an idea of how people back then were using it and how do we kind of make changes too, but otherwise the integrity of the word in all of its context here. So back then it meant refined, elegant, accomplished, literally being polished. It meant elegant, cultured. It meant behaving courteously. So in this case here, I think of the word now as something of reservation for upper class people, of the elite, of the bourgeois, of rich people in general. So in this case, it might have been that people emulated or copied what it means to be rich, and that's where polite behavior came into being, right? Because, if you think about like these grungy villagers, they don't have to be polite. It's more about like, hey, get off my land before I kill you. But for a polite person, like a rich person, it might be like, "Sir, you are on my property." Rather than tell you exactly what they want, they're just making a statement here where it's like, "You're doing this," implying, "Don't do that." So in this case, it seems to be more of like code. It seems to be more of intention rather than direction in this case here. So we're thinking about connotations, right? We're thinking about, okay, what words come to mind when I'm thinking about, politeness. I think about behaviorism. I think about public decency, chivalry, trained, manners, and those last two words sound like animal training, which it kind of is if you think about kids. Kids usually go through this training of manners and so forth. It's kind of like, hey, don't do that, use this fork, whatever, right? And really, at a young age, we are trained to fit into society. So, if anything, the word I think of when it comes to connotations of polite is really this idea of how do I fit in terms of the society around me. Now, I think about how this word is in usage, meaning like how does it kind of play on our everyday lives. I think of code. I think of it mostly for strangers. I think of it as indirect statements that other people oddly understand. Because if you think about it, number one, it is code. It's mostly the things that we say and people get the implications. Number two, we don't say with our friends. We say with people that we don't know for the most part, as a greeting, as a conversation closure, whatever. And number three, what's odd is people understand what we're talking about. Because if I say, hey, how are you? I don't literally mean I concern over your well-being. It's more about, let me ask you for what's been going on to understand you and contextualize you better. And for some reason, other people are okay with that. No one ever calls you out in terms of, what do you mean, how are you? Everyone just kind of goes along with it. Number five, images. We think about now what then comes to mind when you think of the word polite or any word that you're dealing with for semantic mapping. I think of businesses. I think of the image of like two businessmen shaking hands because really this is the place where you have to be super polite in order to get what you want. So for me, politeness deals with this idea of getting what you want indirectly here. For those of you who were in my class last year for 2A, it's basically our ego. To be polite is our ego, to act a certain way. Now, we think about images because you really truly only understand something once you have an image that comes to mind. Otherwise, if I say something that you have never heard of before, nothing comes to mind. You're really trying to fabricate it in terms of, well, what does that mean? We think of images. This is an idea from this guy named Wittgenstein, who's on the right over here. His point is this. Language is super abstract. So if I say cat eating, you might think, okay, a bowl of kibbles and this cat's eating regular cat food. But another person might be thinking, oh, cat eating? I'm thinking about my cat eating his birthday cake on the day of his birthday. So, that's just how I interpret your language here. So even though we think that cat is super clear of what we mean, well, which breed, what species? When we think about eating, well, eating what? It's super ambiguous, and our language is oftentimes taken for granted for what it actually is. All right, so last step here, we're thinking about works that discuss this idea of politeness. I think about Deborah Tannen from last year in 2A. His politeness is her powerlessness. And again, that title is kind of contradictory, but in this case, Deborah Tannen's point was when you are polite to somebody, you basically take away their ability to do something for themselves. In the case of opening a door, I did that for you. You don't have to do it. I pay for the check, for example. I take away the ability for you to, be your own person and pay for your own meal. So really, the more that you do polite things, at least in her view, is that you're taking away the power from the other person, and in this case, make them powerless. And so, with all this in mind, I have a large slew of items from 1 through 6 to build an intro paragraph. Now I have so much more to deal with. And really, I think this video only took like 10 minutes or so. In 10 minutes, I have a super clear intro paragraph of things that I want to talk about in my intro that might bleed into my body paragraph. And really, it's not that hard in terms of just being a little bit more complex, being a little bit more sophisticated, rather than just talk about surface level stuff regarding this idea of politeness or any term that you're given for argumentative essays.